One last comment, and I want to get to the other question.
Well, let me jump in on Brunei's claim on the South China Sea. I'm not going to do that. Just joking. I want to address the first question. I think it's important. I think the reality of security issue that I am most experienced with is on interreligious and interracial kind of conflicts. I've done a lot of research in this, and I've been doing a lot of work in interreligious dialogue when I was working in Singapore. I have both experience working with state functionaries, top-down kind of dialogue groups, as well as bottom-up civil society groups that wanted to create a common space for conversation. And I find that one of the issues with state-driven kind of initiative for dialogue is that it always takes on a security perspective. That we dialogue, that we put people of different religions together in a circle. That is very interesting, especially coming from the experience of Singapore, where the state takes an interest to control almost everything. So then difference is just seen as something that can be neatly compartmentalized and can be dealt with using certain policies and laws. And we know that differences cannot be legislated. Differences has to be lived with and lived through. And so how do we do that? I believe very strongly in dialogue, and dialogue is the only way. Conversation is the only antidote to differences.
Okay, great, thank you. We've got about 4 minutes left, and I want to get back to the first question of violent extremism. H.L. Mencken, that great pundit, said that for every problem there's a solution that's simple, direct, to the point, and wrong. How are we approaching this new, not so new phenomenon of terrorism, violent extremism? Or do we have to, again, reimagine how we approach this? We have some interesting experiences here in the Philippines and other places around this, but last thoughts before we have to close this.
The question was well put, it was cogent and incisive and very sophisticated. We don't have a long time, but very, very quickly. First, I will say that this is not a new problem. We've had violent extremism, terrorism in different ways, through different means over the centuries. However, it is new for us because when we see it, and there are many multifaceted causes, and I think that to come to some kind of a cure is intractable in some ways, but in ways that can be manageable. When we talk about inequality, actually in southern Thailand, you mentioned Marawi here, the source of it is inequality. And we think of inequality in economic terms, income and so on. But no, it doesn't have to be just inequality of incomes. Social inequality, for example, more social recognition, accommodation, dignity. These are sort of outcomes or the aspirations of what I see the Malay Muslim in the southern Thailand. And then there's also politics. I mean, the inequality doesn't have to be just economic, social, but political, administrative. The laws, for example, different laws for Muslims than the rest of the country. So I think the way to tackle these multifaceted inequalities is through inclusion, accommodation, recognition, mutual respect, and a spirit of goodwill. Not easy, but no better alternative.
Okay, just briefly.
Very briefly. I think the main driver of violence in the world today is not simply inequality. Rather, it's exclusion. It's systematic exclusion. People are simply outside of the circuits of modern life. And the modern world system has no need for people under those circumstances. All that the people have at the moment are their bodies and their needs. Perhaps their hopes. They have no skills, they have no education that the modern world system can use. The world simply has no need for them. That is the main problem, I think, that we face. Now, those resentments have been there for a long time, no doubt about it. But the new element, I think, is that the new technologies of communication, of mass dissemination, in effect, right, by paying an advertisement, what's clear is that the recruitment into terrorism has also become global. That's why it has become a far more serious problem than we can ever imagine.
Thank you again. I'm afraid we're running out of time. Let me just end this by saying that after 9/11 and the Twin Towers going down, a commission was put together. Spent 2 years trying to get at what went wrong, what do we need to know. And its primary conclusion was that the problem of 9/11 was a failure of imagination. A failure of imagination. And it's like, what does that mean? And I think that the framework of this conference, The Future Reimagined, for this topic of security and safety, it really puts this in a very different world, that we also have a failure of imagination in many ways, that we need to rethink these issues because we're still fighting old issues, which are still very real, some of the ones we've talked about, but now we have cybersecurity, we have the whole Facebook issues that are coming, we have food security, we have all sorts of new issues that are coming, and there will be new ones. So the question is, what is going to be the future? And how can we reimagine the future so that we can get our hands around how to tackle these very complex issues of safety and security so that we don't continue to slide back towards Maslow's bottom part of the hierarchy, but that we're able to move ahead on that. So thank you for the panel. We've run a little bit over time. That's been very nice. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much to our panelists as well as to our moderator for that very thought-provoking session indeed.
Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you doing today?
Very good, thanks. Very good.
So would you like to provide us a little bit of information about your background, how you ended up doing the work that you do today, and also, how you ended up here at the Future Reimagined?
That would take about an hour, I think. So I'm Brad Googins. I'm a professor at Boston College in the United States, retired. And for years I worked in the sort of the broad area of trying to figure out what's the relationship between business and society. So I formed a center at Boston University when I was teaching there on work and family. How do corporations begin to address the issues of working parents in the workplace, etc. Then moved over to Boston College and started a center on corporate responsibility, where we had most of the large companies in the country, where we would hold events like this, do research on, again, what's the role of business in society. I retired from there about 5 years ago because I began to think and got interested in the issue of social innovation and entrepreneurship. So I taught a few courses so I could learn about it, which is how I always do. And then a colleague from the Catholic University of Milan contacted me and said, I understand you're thinking of retiring. How about coming over and helping me develop this new program in Africa? So the last 5 years I've been working in Africa, working with universities in 9 different countries in Africa. We have a very unique program where we're training on impact entrepreneurs, we call them, in these countries, and at the same time build the capacity of each of these universities so that they can, again, pick this up and run it themselves. So we facilitate the first stage of it, and then they pick it up. So I have the privilege of seeing a lot of very interesting entrepreneurs in Africa who are really getting very excited about what they're doing, and I'm learning so much about, entrepreneurship and developing economies. Yeah. Here, I started coming to the Philippines, I think, about 1978.
Oh, wow.
A long time ago. And I had a good friend who I went to school with who wanted me to come work over here, but I never did. But I got involved in coming over, maybe once every 2 years or so, just on a personal level. And then one year I came and did a sabbatical at the Asian Institute of Management, taught a little bit here, became one of the people in this network that I had put together, a global network, was Phil Alfonso, who was one of the founders really of this whole program. And so I've been involved with this almost from the beginning. I'm on the board of the center, and I feel very committed to trying to help this grow and develop.
Wonderful. So I'm here representing the Global Shapers community, and if you're not familiar with us, we're an initiative by the World Economic Forum to give youth a seat at the table. So a lot of the youth that you'll see here today are from different hubs, Global Shapers, different hubs around the Philippines. We're called the Global Shapers. Sean, who I'm sure you know, he's a Global Shaper from Brunei. And so we have the Manila contingent, the Iloilo contingent, Davao contingent, Cebu contingent here. So I guess from that standpoint, my question to you is, what are the gaps that you see today in your work, and how do you imagine, and how would you recommend that youth and my generation start thinking to, on how to fill those gaps, and what types of things we should be thinking about and doing in order to address some of the issues that you see today?
Yeah. Well, I'm a big believer in experience and experiential learning. And so I say to anybody, I always say to a class, if I'm teaching in Italy or in the United States, if I could lift you up and take you out of here, I could give you a much better education than you get from what we're going to be doing in the classroom here. And there's so many opportunities. I always think about, how did I get into doing what I did? Accidentally. I get exposed to something. Oh, that looks sort of interesting. And so the more experience you can get, we're in an age of specialization where everybody wants to, and particularly like at Boston College, if I'm going to get into some of these consulting firms, I've got to have this course. No, relax. You've got plenty of time to. So I have great curiosity. So, for example, in December, after I was teaching the course in Uganda, I went up north and spent 3 days in the refugee camp, the largest refugee camp in the world, just because I was sort of interested about how could we bring entrepreneurship into a refugee camp. And so I say, stroke and stoke your curiosity. Ask as many questions, get as many experiences as you can, because that will help you understand who you are and what contribution you can make to society. But more importantly, as we say in entrepreneurship, where is your passion? How could we create your passion, and how could we draw on that? So I think that's a very important point for me. And leadership for me, which is where I look to everybody, say, where's your leadership? Is about vision, voice, and value. It's about trying to take your vision, give it a voice, and hopefully have some value to impact society with that. So I think for many people, it's don't rush too early to close yourself off. Use that wonderful time to open yourselves up. Just going to college itself is like, whoa. You don't realize at the time, of course, any more than I did, what a wonderful opportunity that is. But the more experiences you have, the better it will be.
Well, thank you very much for your time this morning. It was a pleasure to meet you.
So my own research area, well, mainly research on minority issues, looking at racial, religious differences, and then looking at some of the issues that might arise with such differences, such as tensions, conflict, but also looking at how to harness diversity for greater good. For example, using resources from diversity to unite people, and then to work on issues that are impossible to solve by one particular party. So you need multiple parties, multiple stakeholders to come together. But in order for them to come together, to work together, they will have to first be able to reconcile their differences and to find some common grounds for them to actually work together. So that is an area that I'm very passionate about. Technology shapes our identity. I think in this hyper-connected world, I say, people cannot live without technology. A lot of young people's identity is built on technology, on social platforms, social media platforms. Instagram becomes their identity. They take on a different persona online. Whether that is real or not, virtual reality, or a outer ego life, whatever. That it's directly connected to their emotional well-being, to who they think themselves are. So technology is inseparable from identity.
And given all these opportunities and challenges brought by...
I think there are aspects of technology that can be quite dangerous, that I think it's quite justified for people to have some reservation or even some fears to such technologies, but then I don't think that should be the attitude towards technology. I think technology is just a tool. It depends on how we use it. If we use it in the right way, technology can actually enhance communication. It can allow people to build a lot of different connections. It can allow people to build a lot of ideas together in a way in which previously would never be possible, right? How had people been able to come together to share ideas in the past where there was no internet across the world, across the Atlantic, across the Pacific and so on, but now they can through emails, through Skype, there's so many ways for them to share ideas. So in that sense, technologies can be incredibly powerful. But on the other hand, technologies has also introduced certain kind of security issues, certain threats that are unprecedented, issues dealing with our private data, issues dealing with our private lives and so on, that even legislations have not caught up with. Yeah, so those are some of the dangers and reservations that we should healthily, in a healthy setting, we should have. Certain healthy skepticism that we should have, and then to protect ourselves and to protect the younger generation to such an enormous tool that they're using.
Thank you. And lastly, what is your call to action for the audience beyond?
Has provided an amazing opportunity for people who come from different sectors who otherwise may not share the same platform to come together. So you got people from the government, you got people from civil society, you got people from the space of education, public intellectuals and so on, to come together to think about the future. But I think imagination is a good start, but it is not enough. The next step is, how do we turn dreams and imagination into reality? How do we actually forge connection that we have made here, and then start really doing something together, working towards the greater good?
Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
I run a think tank in Bangkok called the Institute of Security and International Studies. I also teach. I've been teaching 25 years now at the Chulalongkorn University in Bangkok. So I write columns in newspapers, Bangkok Post, the Straits Times in Singapore. I write research articles and papers and so on. I do some briefings, lectures, public lectures to ambassadors, corporations and chambers of commerce and so on. So a combination of things.
Wow, that's a lot. And with our theme that we're imagining the future, how do you envision the future of governance in Asean or globally?
Governance, there are different ways of looking at it. There's governance, there's government, there's a state. Right? So the governance has to become more responsive. I think societies are changing fast, accelerated by technology. We have social media, things are happening instantaneously. They have immediate impact and consequences. So the governance from the government has to be, I think, reformed. They have to be responsive. They have to be able to keep up with the demands and expectations and aspirations and grievances of societies. If they don't, people will be unhappy. And when people are unhappy, things will happen. Sometimes we have the rise of right-wing populists. Sometimes you have protests in the streets if people are not happy. So I think the governance is the key, really, to social peace
order, and even regional stability.
And with the fourth industrial revolution looming in and this technological changes, how do you think ASEAN should keep up with its relations with neighbors?
ASEAN is individually and collectively challenged by the fourth industrial revolution, because the fourth industrial revolution is very digital. It is very advanced. So I worry about the less developed ASEAN countries. The more developed ASEAN countries like Singapore, Singapore will be able to cope and maybe even capitalize on the fourth industrial revolution. Thailand, Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia may be in between. There will be some winners, losers, but overall, ASEAN as a whole, I would pay more attention to the lesser developed countries like Myanmar, Cambodia, Laos, okay, in order to maintain some coherence of ASEAN. Individual countries of ASEAN also will be challenged. There will be growing inequality because of the fourth industrial revolution. Some people who are well positioned with education, with the means, they will do well, but others will be left behind. So this is a big job for the governments, individually and together regionally, to try to keep up and cope with the fourth industrial revolution. For state security of different countries, it's a mixed bag. On the one hand, we have challenges like cybersecurity. The cyber attacks and the whole cyber world now is getting more dangerous. But they're also the same kinds of tools that can do bad things, that can do harmful things, can also do good things. You can use technology to harness goodwill, like crowdfunding. You can get things done collectively through communications technology. So it's a mixed bag. If we use it right, if we approach it in the right way with goodwill and smartly, it can be a force for good and for greater safety and a safer world. We have to reimagine the global system. This rules-based international order has been liberal international order for the last 7 decades. That system now is exhausted. It has run its course. It needs to be reimagined, reinvented, reorganized. Otherwise, we will have more tension and maybe even conflict.